the prison guards ended up really misusing the inmates. And actually, everything was set up as a game, and everyone knows they were part of a game. But these people all of a sudden started the guards started misusing their power and everything. And at the end, the trial or the research says it's not because those prison guards were bad people. They were randomly selected, but it was the environment in which they and the rules in which they operated. So just a note to myself as well. I think those two things plus the environment, and the question would be how do we discern environment in global communities like token engineering? We're not even a project delivering a thing, but a community of token engineers who want to find their ethos. So how did you do it with the Dada community, for example? Did you stumble upon it, or did you ask people, or what would you recommend when we start by asking people? Do you know what questions or what type of?
No, I'm against asking people anything. Mm-hmm. It's a contrary to user whatever design. And after all these years with data, if you think about it, it's just so obvious that no matter, like, I saw my design team a couple of years ago, like doing all this like surveys and talking to people, collectors and data artists, but they themselves were not involved in the platform. Although we had a weekly drawing and everything as team, they were not really part of it. So you're trying to understand something from the outside, no matter what your intentions or your how much you want to understand it. You cannot understand it until you experience it. So for me, there's a huge difference between asking users what they want or how they feel, and living myself the experience with people that I actually have developed strong bonds with. It's a huge difference. I don't need to ask anything. I know. I just feel it, and they feel it, right? They feel it. They know it. So when we had when the community started consolidating, and we still had those extrinsic things, like we still have them actually, badges and a leaderboard that is somewhere buried. There was a ranking, for instance, and because they understood intuitively that data was not about extrinsic anything. One of the artists said, like, hey, we should take out the ranking because that's gonna, that makes people feel, competitive, and like some people are saying like these are in the top and these are, and it was just common sense, right? So we took it out. There was somebody who said like we should take out the likes, and we haven't yet because but her argument was, I noticed that when I make drawings and the drawings are, I think they're very interesting, there are very few likes, and if I draw something like it's a pop culture thing, there are tons of likes, and that's very misleading. So because that makes people wanted to do the things that they were going to get likes. So you notice these things because your experience is going counter those values, and so I think that's why experience is important, to keep the compass of what you want to do. That's the reason why we don't have any rules written or any constitution. We won't have any constitution. We don't need it. We just need to be aligned in that same mindset.
But that could be one question that you ask then, Shebnem, of the token engineers, is how much experience do they have with the community that they're creating the token for? And if it's not any, then that could be a red flag.
Mm.
I mean, I'm thinking of all of these projects that I see of people wanting to create tokens for indigenous communities. And this certainly after the talk with Harold in Kernel, right? And unless they're embedded in those communities, I can't see how it's gonna, you know, it's like, oh, here, look, I have this wonderful solution that I'm gonna give you. And, you know, that's really offensive to those communities. You think that you're trying to help them, but you're really not. And that I think needs to be highlighted somehow.
But I also think
Yes.
it gets even more insidious, I think, than that, because they may think that that's what they want. And that is the tricky part. So I'll give you an example. I don't know if you are familiar with Behance, which is this like portfolio website thing for artists and designers and so on. That was a big thing 10 years ago or so. There was nothing like that, and it was a very good resource for people to don't have to do their own website, and you could just be there in that platform and everybody will find you. But what was interesting to me is that the guy, Scott Belsky, who founded Behance, it was this guy from Stanford, not a creative at all, and he was somebody who, as his own, if you see his videos, I mean, I find it just so offensive, but I guess it made sense for him and for a bunch of artists. But his thing was that he had been studying creative people and artists like that, as how you study indigenous people, or you study, and in an anthropological way. And he realized that artists were the most unorganized people in the world, and so they needed a way to be organized, and so that is Behance, right? Like, we're organizing the most unorganized people in the world. I mean, they're very creative, they're awesome, but they're very disorganized. And so it's interesting when you see it from the mindset of our current world. It makes sense. It makes sense because artists need to hook up to companies who are hiring artists and corporations who are hiring artists and advertising agencies who are. It makes sense, and that is a good resource for that. But is that what artists need? Artists only need that because they need work to eat, but that is nothing to do with creativity. That's nothing to do with what artists really want. And so when we think about things like indigenous people, like, they may want that. They may want money because they don't have money, but that's not necessarily what they need, or what is intrinsic to them or true to them. We're just trying to bring them into our society and fit here, as opposed to understanding them.
Interesting. So I see definitely now also there are a layer and a second layer, as always, with cybernetics. To what Sparrow said, just to repeat it, so note taking works. So when token engineers think of themselves as algorithmic policymakers, like, they can have this mindset of a system modeler, this is a mechanic thing, and I just need to get enough information, and I can model it, and I can do the policies, I can do mathematical modeling, system formal verification, and everything's going to be perfect. And then they deploy this onto a world of humans, into this uncertainty, into this chaos, and something happens, but certainly, or to a big extent, not what they thought this model will do. And it could even cause more harm if it was super rigid, without feedback loops, and so on and so forth. So there are certainly token engineers or practitioners who think that way, because I know I was. However, the whole, foundations cryptoeconomics, that it brings really also the social sciences into the mix, actually should enable us to even, first of all, to make those other type of token engineers, I don't want to categorize, but those who actually are mindful about or who rather think like an anthropologist or social scientist and know that they are tinkering with highly complex systems and so on and so forth, and who are more humble and more questioning also to their own assumptions. We assume though those are pretty few and they have been already collected in or came together. So that's why I see in concentric circles that inside we have this new realization that we become or we are algorithmic policymakers, and we can deal with that reality very rationally and very mechanistically, and get an insurance, like occupational insurance and stuff like this. And this whole token engineering community might become that ethos, right? Or we push further and make really this the whole of cryptoeconomics flower, especially with the social sciences like law, ethics, psychology, decision making, this type of branches that they're really that they're really represented and feel as token engineers. So I think
that leads to another question perhaps that you could ask. And it would be phrased probably something like, if this system that you're envisioning is wildly successful and does all of the things, gives all the money to the indigenous people, what values are going to be replaced by those new inputs? Right? What's going to be pushed out when you add this new input in? And I think you do touch on it in the token engineering course. You start off with it when you talk about, the Bitcoin optimization, and it was supposed to be about freedom and, censorship and all of those ideals. And yet what the actual results are is energy consumption, right? And nobody ever really, said that's the goal of Bitcoin, but in practice, that's the goal of Bitcoin.
What happened? Yeah. Yes.
So it's already there in your course.
Actually, that reminded me of something that Riges, one of the newer members, also says. Like that we need to judge technology and our technological capabilities by and the medium by what it takes away from human. Basically, yes, it adds and automates and what have you, but what does that take away from humanity or from being a human? So kind of what does it replace with? So cool.
Yeah, what's visible and what's invisible.
But let me come back to these intrinsic motivations. So I had the experience, thankful to be part of the invisible economy roller coaster ride. And I could say that all of that work and interacting with the data community actually helped me to connect back to my intrinsic motivations. And I understand that those cannot be asked, but from your experience, like, for example, how do you know you're not stereotyping? Or how do you know that you picked those intrinsic motivation, intrinsic needs? How do you know? Or, yeah. like imagine we are building community, like that's something that you say, well, it cannot work. You have to have the community first and then think about tokenization, etc. But there were a point where you started off building the community. Would you say that was just luck, that the right people stick around and the others just left, or did you already now had this ground truth of intrinsic motivations, that you knew things very well and you started off with those?
So by the time we came into blockchain, the community had already about 3 years, or 2.5, 3 years. So it was very clear that it was. I mean, I didn't know at the time. I wouldn't call it intrinsic motivations, but it was very clear that it was a community where people felt really close to each other, that we built trust, that we loved each other, that somehow by drawing together, we were creating these really strong bonds. That was very obvious, that people were feeling really happy, and that we somehow didn't have any trolling, any bullying, any conflict. It's not conflict free. There has been moments of conflict, very few, and those moments of conflict have been very, very subtle. And I think at some point we should discuss that. But in general, it's completely conflict free. And so when we got into blockchain and we were getting ready, I mean, we launched the Krypton Weirdos collection in 2017. And then we ourselves went into this roller coaster of NFTs after CryptoKitties. We started getting a lot of people asking, how do I sell my artwork? And we were at the same time preparing to launch the ICO. And so we were getting, on one side, a lot of people asking how to sell their art. On the other side, a lot of people asking how to get into the token sale. And it just didn't feel right. It all felt wrong in so many levels. And a lot of our artists started saying even, feeling that these people are coming here, they don't even want to be part of the community. They just want to sell their stuff. It felt wrong. A lot of them felt that they didn't want to be part of it. They didn't want us to go into blockchain at all, because it was for them destroying the experience that they had. And so it was very clear, like when you have a community that is whose motivations are very intrinsic, it just feels wrong very quickly. So I remember I went, this is like early 2018, I went to Chile, and we did sort of a reunion there with artists from Argentina, Chile, and Peru. And we spent a whole 4 days together in a house, rented a house, cooked together, draw together. And I remember interviewing them and asking them, because they were all against this whole thing about buying. We prefer not to sell anything than to go into this route. And the one thing that I will ask them is like I would push and push and push, and they would say, no. What if we sell this? What if we do that? What if we do tipping? And no, because if I know that somebody tipped me, then I'm going to feel that I have to. No, I don't want any of that. Like everything was no, until I will ask, but can you imagine if you could do what you love, exactly the same things that we're doing now, what we love on data, and at the same time receive a passive income? Will that, and then they will say, well, that would be amazing. And so from the, what if we sell this or that, to if I can continue to do what I'm doing and actually live, be able to make a living out of it, that would be amazing. But if I have to choose between all these things that are going to take away what feels amazing, then no. And so it was very easy for us, because the community is the compass in itself.
So do artists? Sorry, please go ahead.
Oh no, I finished.
Okay. So do artists have how do they call it, an advantage? Like
No,
because as you said, typically, if I would ask myself a year back, why am I in this token engineering community, my answers would be very mechanistic. And I didn't see the entirety of this crypto economics flower until really either I did or was pushed into it. I don't really discern, but actually to ask people from those other disciplines what they see and what they bring into token engineering, only then it opened up a lot. And then again, like this super intense experience with the invisible economy and with you, that a lot of things started clicking, and it was really what I call the epiphany, like things that are actually natural, that but somehow forgotten.
yeah. So that is the
Yeah.
distinction. It's not artists. It's that these particular artists that I'm referring to are artists that are outside the system. They don't have a regular job. They may teach here and there. They may not be artists at all. They may be something else. And that is, I think, the difference. Because if we will have had crypto artists, what you see in the crypto art ecosystem as part of data, the answer will have been completely different. They will have said, yeah, let's go and sell a lot of NFTs and blah, 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 right? So it is how close, I mean, if you think about research, what somebody like Dan Ariely will say is like the closer you are to the market, the least connected you are to your intrinsic motivations, because you're acting within market norms. The farther you are from the market, the closer you are to social norms. And I think a very explicit example of this is that people tend to think that collectors are more extrinsically motivated and artists are always intrinsically motivated. But there was this study on the art market in New York and London, that in which the researcher found that people who were closer to the day-to-day dealings of the market, like curators, galleries, artists, were less, they didn't care about the transcendental thing about art, right? Because they were in the day-to-day dealings, while collectors who just collected by intrinsic rewards were really worried about the transcendental aspects of art that were being corrupted by the market. And so it really doesn't have to, it's not, that's why for us it's not about roles. We don't put people into roles. I could, and I have been that called rational investor, as well as the artist that I'm in front of you today. So we can all fit in all these different aspects if it makes sense to us, and if that's what we need to do to play within an environment.
And that highlights the importance of environment, right? Because the same person will exhibit different behaviors in different environments depending on where they are. So it is all about the environment that you cultivate.
Yeah.
And I think
so this, please,
oh, that's okay. Just a few reflections on exactly that. Sparrow, Livia and I have been talking a lot, and I think in the context of token engineering, we are kind of we have all these, we have the parameterization of the technical parts of the build, which do affect, the outcomes of the system, but we don't really have, we haven't defined or really discussed. And I think that's what's so exciting about this collective and this group is all of these ideas, just bringing the awareness to it, like Eckhart Tolle says, you don't have to actually change, just bringing awareness and attention to this. And that's with, some of the questions that you've been saying, Sparrow and Sheb, even asking these questions is an amazing and incredible part for this process that we're doing. But I think just sharing these ideas a little wider, or putting attention here in this space as we are in this like seed layer of development, to say we are choosing the paradigms that we want to operate in. And the more consciously that we can do that, and we can choose which economies we want to participate in. So there's the spectrum between the quantitative and the leaderboards, and then the other end, of the spectrum, but also being aware that, it doesn't have, we can find ways maybe that it's not so polarized. And also like science is so kind of polarized from intuition. So I think if we can find more alignment, or like weave science and intuition, and for me, I've had talks with Shabnam about, like, I think intuition, like the expression of it in technology, will be quantum computing, because
the quantum
it's 1 and 0 mixed. Like, so I think, and yeah, I mean, I can keep going on philosophically, but I think the main part is expressing these ideas and bringing attention and awareness will be very powerful to discuss as we design our own economies, and we can choose, and this choosing is very powerful. And maybe we won't have a specific model, as B always says, like, it's an embodiment thing and it's an experience. You can't really maybe have a framework and rules that you place that will, and every system is complex. So, and as Fabian says, the more simple the rules, there's the research that says simple rules give rise to, complex and very sophisticated behavior, whereas complex rules, give rise to crappy behavior. But the final note is the feedback that I've received from speaking with token engineers about this topic. They always say, oh, it's the theories, but how do we apply this? So I think there's like this journey that we're on to bring the attention and awareness, and to understand the polarization and how to weave these things together in this space. And then also, like, can we give any tips or to communities and the application of some of these discussions, and like practically how do they, because people want practical, not everybody's willing to engage in this kind of dialogue. So
totally.
What I love about this research about Wikipedia, that their conclusion was that Wikipedia could only exist in practice. In theory, it could never be possible. Right?
Nice, yes.
So I actually think it's all about it's all about empirical, practical experience. I don't care much about theory. The theory is just to justify what we're doing to people who don't understand.
Yes.
Then kill it.
There's something you said, Bea, about being closer to the markets causes you to be less intrinsically motivated. And we just finished yesterday reading Governing the Commons by Ostrom in a book club. And there was a part she mentioned that farmers or people that were like further away from political centers had more freedom to apply their own rules or their own set of agreements. And then now I made this connection. I don't know, it may be interesting to understand what are the things that block some type of freedom and intrinsic motivation. They might be the market, they might be the politics, but what else? There might be something else.
Well, it's the environment, right? Like the politics, you can call the politics a set of rules that define the environment. And so I agree with Fabian. See, we don't have a lot of rules in data. They're very, very simple. And then it turns out that we don't need any rules, right? So I think whether it's the market, which is a very specific set of rules, so it's competition, scarcity, right? It's a very specific set of rules, or whether it's politics, in which usually is applied as rewards and punishment, right? That's also a very specific set of rules, and I myself cannot live in any of those rules. We need freedom, and to be able to carve out our alternative spaces.
So one other thing about tokens particularly that I've become more and more aware of is just how much they feel coercive, because they're all designed, all of the tokens in the space are designed to incent people to do specific things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you say incentivize, just replace that with the word coerce, because that's really what it is. And if you're talking about helping people from disadvantaged places who really need this crypto stuff, right? What you're saying is, you must do this if you want to have enough money to eat. If you don't do this, we will not give you enough money to eat. And that just feels so terrible.
Oh, you don't deserve it. You don't deserve it.
I could actually say a lot about that. Maybe I don't. Are we recording? So maybe I shouldn't. Because I'm in Venezuela, and there has been so many projects trying to take off down here. Millions of dollars invested. Dash invested more than $1 million down here, and they had some very interesting thing, but the motivations were all extrinsic. One of the events had like 1,000 people. That was huge. They were, doing a lot of PR on this, pumping and pumping. But at the end of the day, all of that went away. All the merchants, all the people just went to the events to get an airdrop, like $15. Yeah. So it was all wrong, and it wasn't sustainable. When you look at other crypto projects that had tried to actually do something in this country, it's mostly all of the time the same case. Actually, I'm mentioning this because I'm having in 1-2 hours, I'm having a call with U.S. governments and NGOs on that. Like, hey, so what happened here? How can they use crypto? And they're having the conversation again, but right now with MakerDAO. So anyway, hopefully Septimus isn't recording. But anyway, it's just.
But I think it's a good point, though, because the highlights, and it's the same case with us, because we're working with artists and people have the perception that there is a lack and we have to support them and help them. And so I find in Venezuela, right, there's this huge need to get out of an economic collapse. So of course, people are going to do whatever you want them to do. If that means that that's going to translate into getting something that they can eat with. But that's also what becomes so easily to coerce artists. And so what we're seeing, people. So what we're seeing in the crypto art space is all these new projects in which they're bringing artists to make art, but to sell these NFTs super extrinsically, all about the money. And in which it's obvious that now they're exploiting artists to do their projects. So that's also a tricky thing. When you have a vulnerable community, it's even more easy to exploit them through these mechanisms. Even if that's not what you're intending to, as far as
yeah. So one thing about this block we just discussed is definitely token engineers are also in an environment again where they are maybe coerced into making some decisions through this day to day and what is asked of them to deliver and just do these simulations and figure this out. And so I think there are a lot of couple of, or one block should be about these environments in which token engineers are. The other block is actually their awareness of the environment in which their token models are going to be deployed. I think that will just shun some awareness. On the other hand, I think that awareness will be difficult to be had if, for example, these are just financial protocols, financial instruments, and so on and so forth. So we have a range of very different. I don't want to put that like this, but for example, decentralized finance protocols are just that, right? Finance protocols put on other technology, but they're still financial instruments, and the logic behind isn't much more different. And hence, my assumption would be, for example, that maybe token engineers in those environments aren't at all aware that they should be asking themselves any kind of ethical questions or what have you, or are they, right? So these environments in which they operate and their awareness of the environments in which their tokens are deployed would be great if we can, for example, work those questions out. I think, I think a couple of leading topics were here, but those were definitely super interesting. Are they actually perceive themselves as policymakers, or do they perceive themselves as executing policies? Coming back to the Livia's example of farmers and policymakers and self-organization.
Just one note about that that's coming up really strong for me too is Dan just said like he felt DeFi would dirty his values, and I think there's a tendency as well to like demonize markets, but I don't see them as good or bad. They're just tools. So not that I'm saying I love capitalism and it's done great things for me, but just that, I think when we are talking about engineering or kind of harnessing or using these tools, what are we using the tools for? And I don't think that I would love to see the dream where everybody wakes up and operates from intrinsic motivation, and we have these UBI, streams and rivers and tributaries and this institutionalized generosity, so we don't have to think about these things. But I'm a little more realistic in that I think that some people will still only ever operate in those markets. So how can we also, and this is where I think engineering does fit in, is they may always be in existence. We may not ever see a day while we're alive, where this happens. So I think there's a way that we can still use these things, like creating markets around impact. People do want to make money.
I will completely disagree with you.
Yeah.
I know you have a really good heart, but I will, and I think it's important. I will address this. I think it's not about demonizing markets or, let's say, investors or even traders, right? I think what happens is that there is a tendency to think that if you say, like, I go and say, well, actually people who buy art for extrinsic rewards, like they're buying, the act of buying an art piece for them means they're buying an asset, a private property that they can resell and make money later on. That to me is not an art collector. It's not the attachment is not to the art. The attachment is to the asset, and the asset is there to serve to make profits down the road. So that to me defines an investor. And so we shouldn't have them both together. So when I say these things, which I think are completely logical, then people immediately have the tendency to think, oh, well, but there are investors that they might have an emotional attachment to the art. So they immediately think that to say that means that they don't have any emotional attachment to art, or that they're bad people. And that is not the case. Actually, investors will always, most of the time, invest in things they love, things they care about, people they care about, they trust, missions they support. There is an emotional attachment to it, but their rationality is that the reason why they invest is rational and it's extrinsic. And these are very different, say, motivations and expectations expectations from somebody who is completely moved by an art piece and they just want to have it and they have an emotional attachment to it. And those people tend to buy art and not wanting to sell it. And so first, we shouldn't demonize people who are engaging in the market. That it's like it could be any of us. So if we get that out of the way, we actually should demonize the market in itself, the system in itself. There's no way. I mean, for me, social impact investing or social entrepreneurship is like it's even worse than just Wall Street, because at least you know what you're getting. But the no, it's true. Like the idea that you're doing good while you're using mechanisms that are so toxic to the very thing that you want to achieve is, to me, it's perverse. And so this delusion that we get into, and I'm the first one. I was an entrepreneur for 20 years, and I it's like I made myself believe that what I was doing, at least I was doing it consciously, and I was paying well employees, and I was treating employees great. I was still in power 100%. I'm still in a position of deciding who gets and who doesn't, and their livelihoods. And so there's something about the system that is completely toxic, and there's nothing, I can't see anything in terms of how the market, competition, scarcity, and the structures of companies and institutions that are hierarchical. I cannot see anything redeemable about that. I can't see anything that can come out good out of it, and I show me, because then I want to believe it, but I don't see it. Look at the state of our world. So we have to change exactly the things that make people behave in the ways that we know are toxic and detrimental to society. We have to address that.
Yeah, and that brings us actually to a point, like Michael is mentioning, be open-minded, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, or that's how I interpret it, or say, okay, are we demonizing part of our, peers, right? When we say ethical engineering and token ethical roots, and basically, but see that there has been no consideration in, for example, so that's the thing. And I believe, like, every time when I smile like this, I'm getting to a very uncomfortable place. But so, that's the thing. I believe either we're going to make this, ethical engineering and put a stance, and that will be, and people can decide, that it's too much for them, or they cannot deal with it, or they really are thankful that because we've met people in the course or in the even before in the introductory sessions and so on and so forth, and most or some of them are like, do you really mean it with this ethical engineering? Because their realities just look very, very different. And that's not a token engineering thing, but that's actually anything tech-driven.
It definitely.
Yeah. So
I was just, I'm going to need to go to another call in just a couple minutes. So I just wanted to say, in follow-up to what Bea was talking about, it is one of the realizations that I've had in the last 6 months. And it is definitely something that once you see it and really get it, you cannot unsee it. And it is just very basic that the systems of markets have a particular outcome. And they're the outcomes that we see in the markets wherever we look. And that system will always inevitably produce those outcomes. No matter how many tweaks to that system you try to make, that system produces those outcomes.
Yeah, and the outcome is extreme inequality and externalities
Yes.
and a lot of losers and a few winners. That is always going to be the outcome.
I want to tie it to something that Felix had shared, namely a document, and I can post it later also. Hackers economy. Wait a second. Let me refind. Or Felix, if you want to say something. Yeah, hacker engineer economies, like, because it resonates a lot with token engineering. But what I see as token engineering potential right now, it's still very vivid, and the potential is there. That we actually have the whole crypto economics flower, this diversity, where it's not just about systems engineering and AI and optimization, this purely technical stuff, but the whole eight petals, which also include humanities. And there are computational sciences and so on and so forth. So that's would be my ask from all of you when you participate also in doing the questions, etc. Please don't assume that token engineers are only systems engineers and really programmers, the typical techies. But we have lawyers and so on and so forth, artists, right, in the space, and we want to nurture that. So I want to nurture that. I hope everyone else sees this beauty as well. Like, I have never been in such a diverse environment, and that's turns out to be my intrinsic motivation. By really, I'm identifying with this community a lot because of its diversity. Yeah. So if you basically, I know if people have to go, when we now formulate discussions, if you keep those in mind and check those, and the part about figuring out their intrinsic motivations, but also their environment in which they act, but also always double check or help us to make those questions in a way that we find out most, but also maybe those questions in a way that actually shines or brings awareness to maybe even that diversity topic, right? Felix, please.
Yes. So the text I shared with you, for me, I read it with a specific interest in mind. Basically, the text argues that the text is by Clara Brecke, who's, as far as I know, involved in Dyn.org and was involved in Decent and other EU-funded projects. And she argues that, yes, there are some neoliberal elements in the design of the bigger cryptocurrencies. So she's mostly speaking about Bitcoin. But that is not because of ideological choice. So, meaning that the architects of Bitcoin and of other cryptocurrencies are not necessarily all solid anarcho-capitalists or adherents to the Austrian school. It is more they are pragmatists, and for example, the Austrian school offered them more useful guidance in how to design a currency than other economic schools. And that means that on one hand, these hackers will pragmatically combine whatever they find useful, but for the aim of securing the network. So Becke suggests to understand these cryptocurrencies first of all as networks, where their architects make sure that the network keeps on operating. That's the main aim. And then, well, if you achieve that through Austrian economics, that's great. If any other economic system or economic school will help you in reaching your aims, that's good as well. So meaning that if this is not an ideological choice but just a pragmatic choice, maybe it is. Maybe these can be changed if you find other useful mechanisms, maybe devised by other less market-oriented schools. So, I mean, I found the text. I sent it to you, Shebnem, because I thought it could be the first step to a classification of the token engineer or a characterization of the token engineer. As you said, token engineers are more interdisciplinary in a way, or let's say it's the scope has broadened definitely from hacker geeks wanting to create a currency to much more that we're talking about now. But I think that you still have this rather pragmatic approach of combining things, combining approaches, and see whether they result in what you want. And the aim is still the network, not making money or bringing an abstract theory into empirical existence. So I thought in that regard it could be useful.
True.
If I can jump in for
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I have like a lot of thoughts that I won't be able to unload, but like a few comments also going back to this pragmatic thing. Like when I went to this call, I realized it's like shit, I didn't really prepare. Now we're doing survey, and then we had this completely like parallel conversation in the meantime. But just stepping a little bit back, so Shabnam, you said that people who might do financial protocols, they don't have awareness, right? Now the question is awareness really important or useful or not, and why? So I'm advising a startup in aviation, and they have this really interesting project, and they have some like team dynamic issues. We wanted to do that. We did a survey with them, and one of the questions was, what's the worst thing that can happen? And they said like, oh, we might dissolve the company. To which I thought, actually, those guys are really optimistic. I mean, like they could be sued, like there could be accidents, they could have loans, debts, like different types of liability, and it didn't really come to their mind. But from the other hand, it's not really, like that bad. And now, going back to what we really want, it's like there are some things we want, we just haven't communicated that throughout the call. So basically, what kind of people we want to have in the token engineering community, or what kind of things we would prefer for people to do with, tokens or engineering, and what not, right? So if you think about it, if you have an inventor of dynamite, like that can be really good or really bad. Then that's just technology in the use. And I remember an interview with the guy who was the German inventor for rockets. He said, like, I'm fine, doing rockets because in 5 years or 10 years, I'm going to build a rocket to go into space. So he didn't mind that, like it killed off a lot of people because, like he just wanted to do engineering for the sake of engineering. So where I'm going to, it's like we have our own bias, and, like checking one of the comments from Sparrow, and what was said is probably like what we really want is lead by example, to basically create a new story or narrative of what is possible, like possible, impossible. So that's one of the things. And the other reframe that is in my mind now, we should probably actually go beyond token engineering and start talking about, responsible technology or ethical technology. And then we might be able to involve, like all the other groups of people, because it's not only about tokens or token engineering, there's probably something more than that. Just like things, like reframing my mind.
Gotcha. Yes.
May I add? I think what the text I was referring to also told me or strengthened my belief in. So far, we haven't seen many interesting from economic theory, interesting experiments. We have seen mostly mainstream elements in there, but I think that many of them come by default, because this is what we are immersed in, each and every one of us, in our daily lives, in politics and pretty much everywhere. So I would argue that one should more actively nurture heterodox takes on economics and see how to implement them. So to also spend some thought on not just having an economist, but what kind of economist, what kind of school, what kind of aims, what kind of blind spots does this school have? And that will tell you where your project will go economically.
Yeah, and that's a super interesting point because there, from my point of view, you have a fairly black and white stance. I still want to believe that, I can do social entrepreneurship and I can do impact investment and I can do better, but that's my belief, okay? And the point is that, as Felix said, I have this bias because I saw so much of stuff, so it's very difficult for me to come up with a completely fresh frame. And this is where it's really useful to bring in people from completely, outside space.
Yeah.
And
so I would say, go ahead. And then I can respond to both Felix and Mitch.
Yeah, it's just a comment maybe leading up to it. Definitely, that's why also the invitation to have Bea and Sparrow talk invisible economy, which is also leading by example and being very heterodox. In a way, really, it comes down to artists defining or creating an economy that is sound, right? Because we're checking against and trying to break and see this very pure consistency in that reasoning. So again, that is being, it's just an example actually of putting that we, for example, in this call, do have this lead by example and heterodox alternatives, really. And we might even, but also at the end of the proposal, you see a session of workshops, and definitely invisible economy also is there now. I would reason it a bit more from this perspective, what Felix and Michael actually pointed towards. But yeah.
So I will say, Felix, that that I think because these things are so complex, what we're designing, and we have limitations on what will be the next step to figure something out tomorrow and in a month and in a year. We by default are pragmatists because we have to figure out things as we go, and so. To me, there's not really a lot of space for theory when you have your hands in. But what you said about what was the outcome is, I think, what it makes a difference. If the intent is to create a safe, a very, very safe network, as Bitcoin is, and decentralized and apart from governments and so on, then that's successful. So what is the aim? It's important for us, the aim is to make sure that we preserve the intrinsic motivations of people. That is the only thing that we're trying to do. How do we make sure money comes in and it nurtures and preserves those intrinsic motivations? It hasn't been done before, I think, because if it had been done, we would be copying it. So we have to do it empirically. And we can't just theorize. We have to do it day by day and see what emerges and react to that. So in that sense, I think everybody that would try to, not even a token economy, even any platform, will have a pragmatic approach and will try to get whatever information from whatever place they can. But the intent and the mindset that you have when you're doing these things make all the difference. And so here I'm not talking about ideology, here I'm talking about a mindset, like the things that you believe. So if you believe that it's possible to do something great as a social entrepreneur, the outcome, your decisions are going to be motivated and informed by that belief. The outcome, however, it's going to be just like any other outcome the market produces. So to me, it's not that it's black and white, Michal. I mean, again, I spent 20 years as an entrepreneur, right? So it's also like I'm always been open and flexible and adaptable. But it's also the realization that once you understand the rules of the system, then you understand that what the outcomes are going to be inevitably, because it's been proven over and over and over. So it doesn't matter how good you are, how good your intentions, the outcome is going to be very specific. So then it becomes, the question to me is, what we should leave behind from that system or that mentality, and what can we rescue? I myself rescue the decentralized knowledge of the market, right? And in that sense, maybe that's why, in token engineering, Hayek has a big influence, because it makes a lot of sense when you're talking about networks. But it doesn't have to be the market. That's also expressed in Wikipedia, for instance. And Wikipedia is not under market rules. So it's trying to understand what actually is detrimental to what you want to do, and what is actually helpful. And here I agree. It's not you can't be dogmatic. It can't be about ideology. It can't be about theory. You have to test it. You have to see it. You have to see what emerges. You can't control that.
Yeah, so I hear that, and apologies, like really need to jump because I'm awfully late for a different call. But I hear the point. Basically, from other conversations I had, it's really difficult to do something new in an existing system. So as you're saying, like if you want to create something new in a capitalist economy with money being necessary, to put food on the table, it will be really hard to do, like something different. But again, as usual, great conversation, and I hope, like we will continue that and, see some results.
Thank you, Michal.